Hello geographers, welcome to a series of lessons which have been recorded for you to help you complete your exam. These lessons run alongside a series of work booklets, and these will help you prepare for the questions that we might get. Some of the notes have been completed for you and diagrams included to help with your exam preparation. Where you're expected to make notes or complete a task, the area will be boxed off, and this will help you to know where you need to write. The headings in the booklets match the PowerPoint, so it's easy for you to know which pages match up, but I'll do my best to tell you what pages we're using anyway. The BBC Bite Size website is really useful. Remember, we're studying OCRB and also the CGP OCR revision guide. I should state that I don't own the rights to any of the images or any of the diagrams I've used in these presentations or in your work booklet. I've used QR codes throughout the presentations, which will take you to videos on YouTube. I've also tried to include the links as well. We're going to be using page 6 of our workbook today, so water stress in the UK. Today we're going to be learning about the causes and some of the solutions to water stress in the UK, and I'm going to be explaining what that word means in a minute. Don't forget that some of these lessons overlap with our resource reliance unit, which we'll do at the end of year 11, so it's really important that you understand what you've been learning about. Let's just have a quick recap from last lesson. So we described what these three maps showed. So essentially we said that upland areas have higher levels of precipitation but lower population densities, and lowland areas such as the south and southeast have lower levels of precipitation but higher population densities. So places like the south and southeast, which are lowland areas, have higher population densities but low levels of rainfall, and upland areas have high levels of rainfall but low population densities. Two new keywords for you now: water stress, when there isn't enough water available to meet the needs of the population in an area, and drought, a prolonged period with lower than average rainfall. When there isn't enough water to support people or crops, this is called drought. Pause the presentation and copy down these two definitions into your workbook on page 6. Water stress in the UK. This diagram is at the bottom of page 6, and there is a gap for you to copy down this paragraph. Water supply is an issue in the UK. This is because more water falls in the west and the north, whereas the greatest demand is in the south and the east. Demand in the south and east and supply is in the north and west. This creates water stress in the south and east, where population densities are highest. Pause the presentation and copy down this paragraph. Turn to page 7 of your booklet, please. This takes you to a video clip. You need to scan in the QR code, which is available in your booklet, or it's also on the next slide of the PowerPoint. Scan the QR code. It takes you to a YouTube video, and the specific video it takes you to is BBC Geography, and it's called Water. So if the QR code doesn't work or you cannot click on the link to the YouTube, then you can just type in the heading on YouTube and it will take you to the clip that I need. On that page you have a box where it says notes section. I want you to watch the video and I want you to make notes from that video. Bullet points is fine. There are a few reasons why the UK has water stress. So remember, water stress is when the demand for water is higher than the amount of water available. So one reason is that the climate is changing. We know this. We know the climate is getting a little bit warmer. So it's predicted that the southeast of England will be about as warm as Barcelona by about 2050. So increased temperatures means increased evaporation and so on. There's a greater population, so there's more demand for areas in especially places like the southeast of England and the east of England where it's lowland. There's larger agricultural demand. So 70% of the water we use is used for farming. There's lots of water being used for industrial growth. So factories, power stations, all those kind of things. So about 20% of our water is used for industry. And some of our water is lost through like leakages and waste and things like that. Okay, so those are 5 reasons why the UK has water stress, especially in the southeast of England. Turn to page 8 of your workbooklet, please. We've got this diagram and we've got those 2 questions on page 8. This is a choropleth map. We've seen choropleth maps before. So this specific choropleth map, if we look at the key, it shows which regions have water stress. So if it's red, it says serious levels of water stress. Orange is moderate levels of water stress. The yellow are low levels of water stress, and the grey areas, there's no data. So I've got numbers 1 to 12 also identified as a key. Those are all places in the south or east of England. We've also got some areas identified like Yorkshire, Hartlepool, Anglian, and so on. And so what we can tell from this map is that different regions suffer different levels of water stress. So just to remind you again that water stress is when the demand for water is higher than the amount of water available. 2 questions on the left-hand side. You're going to complete these in your booklet. Number 1, describe the general pattern of water stress in England. And number 2, why are regions in the southeast more prone to water stress? So you're going to think back to what we've learned about so far. So think about our maps to do with population density. Think about our maps to do with which places have the highest levels of precipitation. And think about our maps which talk about like the relief as well. Okay, so we can link back the first 2 lessons into these 2 questions as well. Pause the presentation for a minute whilst you copy down, whilst you complete these answers. This is what your answer could look like. So describe the general pattern of water stress in England. It's only worth 2 marks, so I only need to give 2 points. The further north, the less water stress occurs, e.g. Yorkshire has low water stress. The south and southeast of England has the most serious water stress. So what you'll notice I've done is I've quoted places or areas. So Yorkshire, south, southeast, north, and I've also quoted from the key. So I've said low water stress, serious water stress, and that's got me my 2 marks. Number 2, why are regions in the southeast more prone to water stress? Something like the southeast receives less rainfall than other regions, 1 mark. The southeast are in a rain shadow with the mountains to the west, 1 mark. Turn to page 9, please. We are going to write down 5 reasons why our demand for water has increased. So just a little bit of a summary for you first of all. People in the UK use on average 175 litres of water per day. This contrasts to just 83 litres in Bangladesh. Only 4% of the drinkable water in the UK is actually drunk. The rest is used for other uses such as toilet flushing, washing clothes or cleansing. The demand on our water in the UK has also gone up by 70% since 1985. Below, there are 5 reasons why our demand for water has increased. You're going to pause the presentation for a few minutes and make a note of these 5 reasons. You don't necessarily have to copy the entire sentence out, but you need to make sure you've made detailed enough notes that you'd be able to use them in an exam if you had a question that asked you for some reasons why demand for water has increased. Reason number 1, the UK population has increased, therefore our demand for water has increased. Number 2, personal habits have changed. People shower more regularly, whereas people in the past would have had less frequent baths, often sharing the water with family members. Reason number 3, people are wealthier, so have more water-intensive machines such as dishwashers, washing machines, and even power washers. Reason number 4, farm uses have gone up as irrigation systems improve and consumers demand out-of-season food which needs watering in greenhouses. Reason number 5, industrial uses of water have also increased, as has our use of water in producing electricity. Pause the presentation for a few minutes and make a note of those 5 reasons which explain why our demand for water has increased over time. Turn to page 10, please, of our workbook. The title of this next part is What Can We Do to Reduce Water Stress? So we're going to be discussing some of the possible solutions. You're going to complete the tables using the notes on the board. So option number 1 might be to construct more reservoirs. There's a photograph of a reservoir on the left. A reservoir is a man-made lake which is used to store and release water as needed. Make sure you do know what the word reservoir means because it has come up in our exams in the past. An advantage of using a reservoir is that it increases storage to help when there is less rainfall or when there is drought. It can help to reduce potential flooding downstream. It can provide a reliable source of water all year round. Disadvantages of building more reservoirs. They end up flooding large areas of land which destroy habitats and agricultural land which would be used for farming. They act as a barrier for species movements like salmon because you're often diverting rivers and so on to allow the reservoirs to stay filled. There's lots of evaporation in the summer, which is another disadvantage. So you're going to pause the presentation for a few minutes and you're going to complete your advantages and disadvantages table for the possible solution, constructing more reservoirs. The second possible solution to help the UK reduce water stress is using something called water transfer schemes. This is basically when water is moved from one part of the country to another, so you would move it from an area with low water stress, such as the northwest, to an area of high water stress, such as the southeast. As you can see on this map, we do use lots of water transfer schemes at the moment in the UK. It's actually really common. So we could, in theory, create more water transfer schemes, and that might help to reduce water stress in the southeast. An advantage of this would be that it creates a regular supply of water, which could reduce future water stress. It would increase provision of water to the southeast. Disadvantages, these schemes tend to cost a lot of money. They're often a little bit unreliable because we end up losing a lot of water through like leaky pipes and stuff like that. It takes a lot of upkeep to have a really successful water transfer scheme. They also cause a lot of environmental damage. They affect fish migration patterns, for example. So pause the presentation and under the box that says water transfer schemes, summarise some advantages and disadvantages. So water transfer schemes is a second example to reduce water stress in the UK. A third example of how we could reduce water stress in the UK is to encourage water conservation. What that means is encouraging people to use less water. The advantages of conserving water would be that it helps to preserve supplies by reducing the demand and reducing the amount of water we waste. It's a lot cheaper and it's a lot more environmentally sustainable. Disadvantages include that it doesn't really reduce water stress by a huge amount. Other large-scale methods might still be required and you're kind of relying on people choosing to conserve water, and it's very difficult to make people choose to do things sometimes. So pause the presentation please under encourage water conservation, summarise the advantages and disadvantages so that you have a good understanding. You've got 3 really solid examples about what we can do to reduce water stress in the UK. On the board now are some other possible options that some governments in some countries are choosing to use to help reduce water stress for their specific country. On the left-hand side, we have something called a desalination plant. Essentially, a desalination plant removes the salt from salt water. These plants can supply up to 150 million litres of water a day, so about enough water for 400,000 households or about 900,000 people. So potentially very, very useful in the future. This plant here runs on renewable energy to power it. However, they are very, very expensive to build. They're not very environmentally friendly, and so at present, lots of governments are choosing not to invest in these. On the right-hand side, we've got a picture of like a tugboat. It's dragging some floating ice, probably from somewhere like the North Atlantic. So some countries are able to use this type of resource, and it's very beneficial for them to help reduce water stress in their country. Obviously that benefits some countries, and some countries wouldn't have access to floating ice. But they're two possible options. We've got two other options on the board now. The one on the left is something called fog catching. Fog catching is common in areas such as South America, especially along the coast, where upland areas get lots and lots of fog, but they don't necessarily get loads of rainfall, especially in places such as like the Atacama Desert. It's useful on a really small scale, but it's obviously one way that countries can reduce their water stress, especially in countries that do get very low levels of rainfall. And the picture on the right hand side shows an aeroplane which is doing something called cloud seeding. The idea of cloud seeding is to trigger rainfall to enable clouds to develop, especially during droughts. It's very bad for the environment, but it's potentially in the future a solution to help countries have more rainfall. So, so far we've covered desalination, potentially using fresh water stored in floating ice, fog catching, cloud seeding, as for possible alternatives that people could use around the world to help them reduce their water stress. Okay everyone, turn to page 11 please of our workbook. This is an example of what an exam question could look like. It's quite a complicated exam question. There's lots of hard keywords in here, so we have to make sure that we can break down the exam question so that we know exactly what the exam board want us to write about, so that we don't accidentally write about the wrong thing. Evaluate. Evaluate means to write about the advantages and disadvantages, to come to some kind of conclusion. Initiatives. Initiatives is another word for a project or something that we could do. So an initiative that we have studied would be water transfer schemes, reservoirs, and reducing the demand for water, so encouraging people to use less. It says alleviate water stress. We have to know what that part of the exam question means. Alleviate water stress means how can we reduce the problem of not having enough water. Alleviate means to stop something, to reduce something. And it says the southeast of England. So we're going to talk about different initiatives to reduce water stress in the southeast of England. Pause the presentation for a few minutes whilst you have a go at completing this answer by yourself. It's a 6-mark question, so I would probably spend no longer than about 7 or 8 minutes answering this question. Complete the exam question using your notes from today's lesson. Pause the clip whilst you complete this and then press play when you're ready to review your answer. Here is an example answer that would be worth 6 marks. If you were really struggling to write a really high quality answer to this question, then feel free to copy the answer that I've given on the board, or even better, if you can use this answer to improve your own answer. Water stress is a problem for the south and east of England. Water stress is when there isn't enough water available for the demands of the population. One way to alleviate, which means reduce, water stress is by building additional reservoirs. An advantage of this is that it would increase the storage of water in seasons where there is more rainfall and be able to release water in the seasons where there is less rainfall. However, reservoirs cost a lot of money to build and destroy large amounts of agricultural land. Often, rivers would need to be diverted to supply water for the reservoir. A second possible initiative to alleviate water stress in the southeast is to transfer water from areas of low water stress such as Wales and the northwest of England. This would involve piping water from one location to another. An advantage of this would be that it would reduce the surplus water in some areas, which often leads to flooding, and transfer it to places with lower rainfall, such as the southeast. A disadvantage of this type of initiative is that it would be very costly and leakage from the pipes reduces the efficiency of the water transfer. One final example, but possibly the least effective initiative, is to encourage people to use less water. This would be dependent on people choosing to make sustainable choices which they might not choose to do. For this to reduce water stress, it may need to be used alongside other initiatives. Overall, I feel that each initiative has its advantages and disadvantages, but my overall opinion is blah blah blah, which I feel would have the biggest impact in reducing water stress in the southeast. Pause the presentation for a few minutes, read through the answer that I've given as a sample, and either make bullet points and use those bullet points to help improve your answer, or if you were really struggling to write your own version of this answer, copy down my example, but make sure that you've highlighted the keywords so that you know where marks would have been gained. Well done, geographers. We're now at the end of this section. So far in this unit, we have talked about an overview of human and physical geography characteristics. We've looked at population density, we've looked at land use, we looked at relief rainfall, and we've looked at the issues associated with these characteristics, and so far we've looked at water stress. Well done so far. We're going to move on to booklet 2 next.